Episode 682. Book talk begins at 10 minutes. Cranford begins with episode 679.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania.
Episode 682. Great Scott! This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by our lovely listeners who support the show as members at craftlit.com/premium or patreon.com/craftlit or craftlit.libsyn.com. And from there, you can join the premium feed on the app and listen to all of the premium books that way. And this week, we would like to highlight Judy Serrato, Larry, Jean Greaves, Karen LePage, and Robert. Thank you so much for your support. We truly could not do this without you. So, hi. Great Scott, right? What could this be? This could be the raffle item for this week. That's right. Becca, who was on the Jane Austen live stream at the end of Emma with me, who has the Book It with Becca blog. She is also a spectacularly good cross-stitcher, and I no longer am. My eyes have decided no more. So I sent Rebecca a cross-stitch kit that I got at Sir Walter Scott's home on the CraftLit Scotland tour. And I loved it. I started it. It's just gorgeous. I could not finish it. But Becca shows up on Thursday nights, and I found out she's a really good cross-stitcher. So I sent it to her. And she decided that the best thing to do with it would be to send it back to me so that we can raffle it off. So this month, the month of May 2025, we'll be raffling off this glorious piece of cross-stitchery. And if you're watching on YouTube, we will have the dimensions and a photograph for you. And if you are listening, in the show notes, we will have the dimensions and a photograph for you as well, so that you can see the gloriousness that is this lovely little piece of stitchery. It's not actually that little, it's sizable. It will not be framed. I am going to send it to you probably rolled up. Yes, I suppose I could frame it, but then I may not choose the colors of matting that you want and all that stuff. So no, I'm going to let you do something with it that will make it pretty in your home. So link in the show notes to the Rafflecopter page so that you can sign up and hopefully win this lovely piece of cross-stitchery. Me, I have been gardening when I can be up and about, and hand stitching when I can't be. More on that next week. But yeah, I found an interesting Olla video, or Olla, or if you're Argentine, Olla, OLLA. These are the ceramic pots that people put in the ground and then surround the pots with plants. And then the pot has a cork or a stopper or a lid on it. Take the lid off, pour water in, close it, and the ceramic pot leaches water into the soil surrounding it, so that it's kind of like a drip irrigation, but for people who don't have drip irrigation. The reason I'm bringing it up is because there is a guy who shows you how to do one without a kiln. I know. I am not going to do this. I don't have a yard. I could never get away with doing this legally, but it's very interesting to see how he does it. The other video that I was going to share with you was a very clever drip irrigation thing that uses a water bottle or a soda bottle with a cap on it, and tubing and jute twine inside the tubing all the way down. You stick the tubing into the cap. So you drill a hole, stick the tubing in the cap all the way down to the bottom of the water. And then you have the tubing with the jute in it coming down. You tie a little knot at the end where the jute comes out of the tubing. And as long as the water bottle is above and the end of the jute with the knot on it is below, that jute will keep dripping water onto whatever you've got going there. How much will it drip? I do not know. I have not tried this yet, but genius idea. So both of those videos will be linked to from the show notes. And by this time, I may have enough gardening videos that Eric will put that up during the book chapter today. If not, next time. I think I'll probably have enough video of that. And don't forget, send us your videos. There is a link in the show notes where you can go to both see somebody's sample. Well, not somebody's. You can see Leanne's sample video. She's a lace maker. She's an amazing bobbin lace maker. So you can see her making bobbin lace. And then you can see also what text she has chosen to put on the screen. So if you have a group you want to promote, if you have an Etsy store that you want to promote, anything like that, this is a marvelous way for you to do it. Share some of your craftiness. Just, take a video with your phone and use your hands. You don't have to be on screen at all. You'll see Leanne's hands are the only thing that you see on her video. And or a video of you gardening or crocheting or making jewelry, whatever. Cooking a pie. Honestly, a little food porn would not be a bad thing. So exciting. Okay, so all the good stuff out of the way. Now, last Thursday, we had our Thin Man book party. Thin Man, Dashiell Hammett. Thin Man's fun. Book is fun. Book is great. May, this month, for our watch party, we're watching the movie. And if you have never seen The Thin Man, this is one to come and join us on. It's a hoot. It's a fine murder mystery too. There's nothing wrong with the murder mystery, but you know how hard it is. I know I've said this before. I am repeating myself that so often in TV shows, whether it's Moonlighting or Castle or whatever, when the two people finally get together and confess their affection for each other, it kind of goes meh after that. The Thin Man is the movie that I look to consistently to go, see, it doesn't have to be stupid, boring, ruining life, because we make it seem like the only fun part of life is courtship. I mean, marriage is, real life. It's not courtship, but that doesn't mean it's not fun or funny or flirty or romantic. We just, whatever. We knew how to do it when we did The Thin Man, is what I'm saying. So, a lot of fun. William Powell is great. No diss to William Powell, but Myrna Loy. Okay, just one thing. If you have read the book, there is a moment where Nick of Nick and Nora, Nick says something kind of vaguely obnoxious. And in the book, it's written that his wife wrinkles her nose at him. Myrna Loy does that in the movie. That's how close the book and the movie are together, but also just how good the book is. That someone who looks like Myrna Loy pulled it off so seamlessly. I don't know. I'm going to keep going on. I'm going to shut up. Come and join us to watch The Thin Man. It is so much fun. And God knows, fun, smart, love, centered filmage right now sounds really good to me. So, yeah. If you are not a member, if you are not a patron, if you're not anywhere in any of this, but you want to join us for that party, there will be a link in the show notes so that you can go do a power up, a level up, and come join us, and everything will be perfect. All right, so last week was chapter 3. Chapter 3, A Love Affair of Long Ago, where Miss Matty Jenkyns reminisces about her past romance with Mr. Holbrook, which, of course, was thwarted by her family. And it's kind of hard to tell if it was father or Deborah. Something happened. We will find out more, just not necessarily right away. I did love Martha being the new girl of all work, trying to learn how to do her job, and then nudging Major Jenkyns when he didn't serve himself fast enough. That just sticks in my head. I love that so much. Yeah. So chapter 4 today. Chapter 4 is A Visit to an Old Bachelor. There's not too much. I can't remember if it's pronounced differently in the Noel Badrian version, but at one point it says Miss Matilda SATE bolt upright, SATE. It's a form of the word sat, but in case he says it the way it's spelled, I didn't want you to think, wow, what was going on with that? It is actually in the book spelled SATE, SATE. Miss Matilda sat bolt upright. There's a lot of poetry in today's chapters, and the lovely young gentleman who read for Lady Susan when we did the Lady Susan Premium, he is going to record some of those poems, like selected clips from these poems. We're going to play them on the flip side, just so you can kind of get a vibe of the chapter first, and then we'll give you like a greatest hit selections from the poems themselves, so you can see a little bit more about Mr. Holbrook, who is the one who is going to be quoting all these poems. A Turkey carpet is a Turkish carpet, and a flag floor is a flagstone floor. So, putting before meat, there is going to be a whole conversation about having pudding before meat, and then this quote: no broth, no ball, no beef. So the idea is you have to eat something to take the edge off before you get to the most expensive part of the meal, the meat, so that you don't eat too much of the expensive stuff instead of kind of pacing yourself. So a ball would have been a suet dumpling, which was apparently a Yorkshire area old way of doing things. But I am going to defer to listeners who know better about these things. And by listeners, I mean Mad Daguerre.
Hi, Heather. In reference to your question about pudding before meat in Cranford, as you'll have found out in your research, the term pudding in British English is often used as a generic term for dessert. And there are some sweet puddings that we specifically refer to, like suet puddings and spotted dick, things like that. However, there are also a lot of savoury puddings, like steak and kidney puddings. I think, though, the reference in Cranford relates to Yorkshire pudding, and this isn't really a pudding at all in that it doesn't have suet in it, which a lot of puddings do. It's batter that's cooked in the oven and it puffs up. And nowadays, it's often used as a container for meat and gravy as part of a roast dinner. But from doing a little bit of Googling, it seems like in the olden days, they used to just serve it with gravy at the beginning of a meal to try and fill people up so they didn't need as much meat. So that's what I think they're referring to in Cranford when they refer to pudding before meat. I hope this helps.
So I thought that was very helpful. And then she also sent a lovely link for the Yorkshire pudding, A Humble History, which we will link out to. And then, because Maya Daguerre is just the best, she said, update, I've been chatting to my friend whose family is Yorkshire all the way back. And she said as a child in the 60s and 70s, they still had Yorkshire pudding and gravy first to fill them up. So the gravy from the meat, but not the meat. It's probably also a bit of class snobbery about it, as it was a way of being frugal when money was tight. And I imagine, post-war Britain, food shortages of kind of luxury items, that was still going on well into the 60s, right? I'm trying to remember when I first visited England. I remember Indian food having definitely caught on, but I wouldn't be surprised if outside of London, stuff was pretty tight still, unless you had your own garden. So that's what we're talking about here. Putting before meat, no broth. So if you don't have your soup to fill you up, no ball, no suet dumpling, no beef. It makes a lot of sense. I think now a lot of times what we have done is if I'm not sure if I made enough of the main dish, we have big salads first, usually with like garbanzo beans in them. And then you kind of fill up on that. And then there will absolutely be enough meat because reasons. So things to know, old-fashioned forks, like 16th century-ish, 1500s era-ish, were two-tines, two pokey things, like what we would use to, well, smaller versions, but what we would use to hold meat while we were carving it. Like if you're carving a turkey, you have the stabby fork and anchor the bird and then slice it. If you had a fork at all in the 1500s, it would be that kind of fork. By 1800, most of the two-prong stabby forks were replaced by the four-prong forks. And you may say to yourself, well, then how did people eat? Well, spoons, people did have spoons, sure. But also they had knives and ones that had a fairly broad blade. And so you could just scoop stuff onto your knife and eat it that way, which by the 1800s would have been ever so déclassé. So yeah, you're going to hear some fun with two-prong forks. They do a marvelous job of that scene in the miniseries as well. There is going to be a reference to Aminé at her grains of rice after her previous feast with the Ghoul. And I went, what now? If you have read the Arabian Nights, you may remember that Aminé is the wife of Sidi-Nouman, who notices that she only ever eats rice, and she eats it with a bodkin. So a bodkin is like a long needle or a skewer. And so he's like, what is going on with that? So he finally figures out that she's a ghoul who goes to cemeteries at night to feast on the newly buried dead. So rice was kind of meh for her, but it also meant that she'd just kind of pick at it to have something to do because whatever food was being served to her was not the kind of food that she liked. So that's where that comes from. It's picking at your food. But it's picking at your food in a literary way. There is a reference to unbecoming calashes to put over their caps. This threw me because the last time I remembered something that sounded like or looked like calash were calashes, and that was in Dracula. Those were carriages. Well, they are related. If you think about a calash, the carriage, it was a small carriage that had the kind of roof that was a hood that you could pull up over. So it had flexible ribs, and then it had the fabric that would stretch out between the ribs, kind of like an umbrella does. So you could put the hood roof up, or you could take it down. Well, calashes, 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 caleche, the calashes were like oversized bonnets. They were hoods, but they did the same thing. You could pull them up over whatever else you're wearing on your head, whether it's a cap, a little dust ruffle cap or whatever. You'd put these things up to keep the rain off. They are not particularly attractive. And if you're watching YouTube, you will see the picture on the screen. If you are looking at the show notes, you will be able to see the picture in the show notes. They're not the best looking thing you've ever seen, but functional. And it's kind of like, having an umbrella on your head, just on your head. So that's easy. You don't have to hold an umbrella while you're holding anything else, like a child or a parcel or something. You just have over bonnet. Some Tennyson is going to pop up off and on throughout. There's lots of poetry, but some Tennyson will pop up. There's a line about cedars, and that comes from 1842's The Gardener's Daughter. In the original text, the line before the one about the cedars appeared to be talking about the color of ash buds, saying something was black as ash buds. It is missing. That line is missing from the published version of this book. So in our version of the text, there is this weird non sequitur flip from cedars to the colors of ash buds. It makes more sense in the way it was published in Charles Dickens Magazine. So just know that if your head kind of tweaks and what? It's not you. They decided to cut that line for reasons I don't understand. Yeah, that's it. Crocheters, heads up. There's going to be a lovely little joke line for you. It's one of the reasons I love Gaskell so much. She's a female who does female things at the time, and she lets us know that we have not changed that much. Another thing from Tennyson, Locksley Hall. It's about a lover who revisits the place that he fell in love with a woman who was forced to marry someone else. You can see the connection here. So it wasn't included accidentally, the reference to it, not accidental. Visiting rules. We have to revisit visiting rules. It would be making a statement were a gentleman to call on a lady directly, or at least it would if he and the lady were younger. This is why when Captain Brown would visit the Miss Jenkyns, it flustered Deborah Jenkins. Because it's like, but you're not interested in either of us. This just simply is not done. And then she kind of got over her bad self and got used to it. So that doesn't change that it would be something that was noticed by polite society. And I think that's it. That's everything you need for this chapter. Next week, we got a lot more notes than this. Next week's got a lot of stuff going through. But I will catch you on the flip side with some other things just to make sure you didn't miss anything. And there's a couple of things I didn't want to spoil for you. So, all right, let's listen to chapter 4 of Cranford, read for us by Noel Badrian. If you are listening to your own version of this book, please fast wind to 49 minutes and 50 seconds. All right, here we go.
Chapter 4 of Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. A visit to an old bachelor. A few days after, a note came from Mr. Holbrook asking us, impartially asking both of us, in a formal, old-fashioned style, to spend a day at his house. A long June day, for it was June now. He named that he had also invited his cousin, Miss Pole, so that we might join in a fly, which could be put up at his house. I expected Miss Matty to jump at this invitation, but no, Miss Pole and I had the greatest difficulty in persuading her to go. She thought it was improper, and was even half annoyed when we utterly ignored the idea of any impropriety in her going with 2 other ladies to see her old lover. Then came a more serious difficulty. She did not think Deborah would have liked her to go. This took us half a day's good hard talking to get over. But at the first sentence of relenting, I seized the opportunity and wrote and dispatched an acceptance in her name, fixing day and hour, that all might be decided and done with. The next morning she asked me if I would go down to the shop with her, and there, after much hesitation, we chose out 3 caps to be sent home and tried on, that the most becoming might be selected to take with us on Thursday. She was in a state of silent agitation all the way to Woodley. She had evidently never been there before, and, although she little dreamt I knew anything of her early story, I could perceive she was in a tremor at the thought of seeing the place which might have been her home, and round which it is probable that many of her innocent girlish imaginations had clustered. It was a long drive there, through paved, jolting lanes. Miss Matilda sat bolt upright, and looked wistfully out of the windows as we drew near the end of our journey. The aspect of the country was quiet and pastoral. Woodley stood among fields, and there was an old-fashioned garden where roses and currant bushes touched each other, and where the feathery asparagus formed a pretty background to the pinks and gillyflowers. There was no drive up to the door. We got out at a little gate and walked up a straight box-edged path. "My cousin might make a drive, I think," said Miss Pole, who was afraid of earache and had only her cap on. "I think it is very pretty," said Miss Matty, with a soft plaintiveness in her voice, and almost in a whisper, for just then Mr. Holbrook appeared at the door, rubbing his hands in very effervescence of hospitality. He looked more like my idea of Don Quixote than ever, and yet the likeness was only external. His respectable housekeeper stood modestly at the door to bid us welcome, and while she led the elder ladies upstairs to a bedroom, I begged to look about the garden. My request evidently pleased the old gentleman, who took me all round the place and showed me his 26 cows, named after the different letters of the alphabet. As we went along, he surprised me occasionally by repeating apt and beautiful quotations from the poets, ranging easily from Shakespeare and George Herbert to those of our own day. He did this as naturally as if he were thinking aloud, and their true and beautiful words were the best expression he could find for what he was thinking or feeling. To be sure, he called Byron my Lord Byron, and pronounced the name of Goethe strictly in accordance with the English sound of the letters, as Goethe thee says, "Ye ever verdant palaces," etc. Altogether, I never met with a man before or since who had spent so long a life in a secluded and not impressive country, with ever-increasing delight in the daily and yearly change of season and beauty. When he and I went in, we found that dinner was nearly ready in the kitchen, for so I suppose the room ought to be called, as there were oak dressers and cupboards all round, all over by the side of the fireplace, and only a small Turkey carpet in the middle of the flag floor. The room might have been easily made into a handsome dark oak dining parlour by removing the oven and a few other appurtenances of a kitchen, which were evidently never used, the real cooking place being at some distance. The room in which we were expected to sit was a stiffly furnished, ugly apartment, but that in which we did sit was what Mr. Holbrook called the counting-house, when he paid his labourers their weekly wages at a great desk near the door. The rest of the pretty sitting-room, looking into the orchard and all covered over with dancing tree shadows, was filled with books. They lay on the ground, they covered the walls, they strewed the table. He was evidently half ashamed and half proud of his extravagance in this respect. They were of all kinds, poetry and wild weird tales prevailing. He evidently chose his books in accordance with his own tastes, not because such and such were classical or established favourites. "Ah," he said, "we farmers ought not to have much time for reading, yet somehow one can't help it." "What a pretty room," said Miss Matty, sotto voice. "What a pleasant place," said I aloud, almost simultaneously. "Nay, if you like it," replied he, "but can you sit on these great black leather three-cornered chairs? I like it better than the best parlour, but I thought ladies would take that for the smarter place." It was the smarter place, but, like most smart things, not at all pretty or pleasant or homelike. So, while we were at dinner, the servant girl dusted and scrubbed the counting-house chairs, and we sat there all the rest of the day. We had pudding before meat, and I thought Mr. Holbrook was going to make some apology for his old-fashioned ways, for he began, "I don't know whether you like new-fangled ways." "Oh, not at all," said Miss Matty. "No more do I," said he. "My housekeeper will have these in her new fashion, or else I tell her that, when I was a young man, we used to keep strictly to my father's rule. No broth, no ball. No ball, no beef, and always began dinner with broth. Then we had suet puddings, boiled in the broth with the beef, and then the meat itself. If we did not sup our broth, we had no ball, which we liked a deal better, and the beef came last of all, and only those had it who had done justice to the broth and the ball. Now folks begin with sweet things and turn their dinners topsy-turvy." When the ducks and green peas came, we looked at each other in dismay. We had only 2-pronged black-handled forks. It is true the steel was as bright as silver, but what were we to do? Miss Matty picked up her peas one by one on the point of the prongs, much as Aminé ate her grains of rice after her previous feast with the Ghoul. Miss Pole sighed over her delicate young peas as she left them on one side of her plate untasted, for they would drop between the prongs. I looked at my host. The peas were going wholesale into his capacious mouth, shovelled up by his large round-ended knife. I saw, I imitated, I survived. My friends, in spite of my precedent, could not muster up courage enough to do an ungenteel thing, and if Mr. Holbrook had not been so heartily hungry, he would probably have seen that the good peas went away almost untouched. After dinner a clay pipe was brought in and a spittoon, and, asking us to retire to another room, where he would soon join us if we disliked tobacco smoke, he presented his pipe to Miss Matty, and requested her to fill the bowl. This was a compliment to a lady in his youth, but it was rather inappropriate to propose it as an honour to Miss Matty, who had been trained by her sister to hold smoking of every kind in utter abhorrence. But if it was a shock to her refinement, it was also a gratification to her feelings to be thus selected. So she daintily stuffed the strong tobacco into the pipe, and then we withdrew. "It is very pleasant dining with a bachelor," said Miss Matty softly, as we settled ourselves in the counting-house. "I only hope it is not improper. So many pleasant things are." "What a number of books he has," said Miss Pole, looking round the room, "and how dusty they are." "I think it must be like one of the great Dr. Johnson's rooms," said Miss Matty. "What a superior man your cousin must be." "Yes," said Miss Pole, "he's a great reader, but I'm afraid he has got into very uncouth habits with living alone." "Oh, uncouth is too hard a word. I should call him eccentric. Very clever people always are," replied Miss Matty. When Mr. Holbrook returned, he proposed a walk in the fields, but the 2 elder ladies were afraid of damp and dirt, and had only very unbecoming calashes to put over their caps, so they declined, and I was again his companion in a turn which he said he was obliged to take to see after his men. He strode along, either wholly forgetting my existence, or soothed into silence by his pipe, and yet it was not silence exactly. He walked before me with a stooping gait, his hands clasped behind him, and, as some tree or cloud or glimpse of distant upland pasture struck him, he quoted poetry to himself, saying it out loud in a grand, sonorous voice, with just the emphasis that true feeling and appreciation give. We came upon an old cedar tree, which stood at one end of the house. "The cedar spreads his dark green layers of shade." Capital term, layers. Wonderful man. I did not know whether he was speaking to me or not, but I put in an assenting "wonderful," although I knew nothing about it, just because I was tired of being forgotten, and of being consequently silent. He turned sharp round. "Aye, you may say wonderful. Why, when I saw the review of his poems in Blackwood, I set off within an hour, and walked 7 miles to Misselton, for the horses were not in the way, and ordered them. Now, what colour are ash-buds in March? Is the man going mad, thought I. He is very like Don Quixote. What colour are they, I say, repeated he vehemently. I'm sure I don't know, sir, said I, with the meekness of ignorance. I knew you didn't. No more did I, an old fool that I am, till this young man comes and tells me. Black as ash-buds in March. And I have lived all my life in the country. More shame for me not to know. Black, they are jet black, madam. And he went off again, swinging along to the music of some rhyme he had got hold of. When we came back, nothing would serve him but he must read us the poems he had been speaking of, and Miss Pole encouraged him in his proposal. I thought because she wished me to hear his beautiful reading, of which she had boasted. But she afterwards said it was because she had got to a difficult part of her crochet and wanted to count her stitches without having to talk. Whatever he had proposed would have been right to Miss Matty, although she did fall sound asleep within 5 minutes after he had begun a long poem called Locksley Hall, and had a comfortable nap unobserved till he ended, when the cessation of his voice wakened her up, and she said, feeling that something was expected, and that Miss Pole was counting, "What a pretty book!" "Pretty, madam? It's beautiful." "Pretty indeed." "Oh, yes, I meant beautiful," said she, fluttered at his disapproval of her word. "It is so like that beautiful poem of Dr. Johnson's my sister used to read. I forget the name of it. What was it, my dear?" turning to me. "Which do you mean, madam? What was it about?" "I don't remember what it was about, and I've quite forgotten what the name of it was, but it was written by Dr. Johnson, and was very beautiful, and very like what Mr. Holbrook has just been reading." "I don't remember it," said he reflectively, "but I don't know Dr. Johnson's poems well. I must read them." As we were getting into the fly to return, I heard Mr. Holbrook say he should call on the ladies soon and inquire how they got home, and this evidently pleased and fluttered Miss Matty at the time he said it. But after we had lost sight of the old house among the trees, her sentiments toward the master of it were gradually absorbed into a distressing wonder as to whether Martha had broken her word, and seized on the opportunity of her mistress's absence to have a follower. Martha looked good and steady and composed enough as she came to help us out. She was always careful of Miss Matty, and tonight she made use of this unlucky speech. "Eh, dear ma'am, to think of your going out in an evening in such a thin shawl. It's no better than muslin. At your age, ma'am, you should be careful." "My age?" said Miss Matty, almost speaking crossly for her, for she was usually gentle. "My age? Why, how old do you think I am, that you talk about my age?" "Well, ma'am, I should say you were not far short of 60, but folks' looks is often against them, and I'm sure I meant no harm." "Martha, I'm not yet 52, said Miss Matty with grave emphasis, for probably the remembrance of her youth had come very vividly before her this day, and she was annoyed at finding that golden time so far away in the past. But she never spoke of any former and more intimate acquaintance with Mr. Holbrook. She had probably met with so little sympathy in her early love that she had shut it up close in her heart, and it was only by a sort of watching, which I could hardly avoid since Miss Pole's confidence, that I saw how faithful her poor heart had been in its sorrow and its silence. She gave me some good reason for wearing her best cap every day, and sat near the window, in spite of her rheumatism, in order to see, without being seen, down into the street. He came. He put his open palms upon his knees, which were far apart, as he sat with his head bent down, whistling, after we had replied to his inquiries about our safe return. Suddenly he jumped up. "Well, madam, have you any commands for Paris? I am going there in a week or two." "To Paris?" we both exclaimed. "Yes, madam, I've never been there, and always had a wish to go, and I think if I don't go soon, I mayn't go at all. So as soon as the hay is got in, I shall go before harvest time." We were so much astonished that we had no commissions. Just as he was going out of the room, he turned back with his favourite exclamation. "God bless my soul, madam, but I nearly forgot half my errand. Here are the poems for you you admired so much the other evening at my house." He tugged away at a parcel in his coat pocket. "Good-bye, miss," said he. "Good-bye, Matty. Take care of yourself." And he was gone. But he had given her a book, and he had called her Matty, just as he used to do 30 years ago. "I wish he would not go to Paris," said Miss Matilda anxiously. "I don't believe frogs will agree with him. He used to have to be so very careful what he ate, which was curious in so strong-looking a young man." Soon after this I took my leave, giving many an injunction to Martha to look after her mistress, and to let me know if she thought that Miss Matilda was not so well, in which case I would volunteer a visit to my old friend without noticing Martha's intelligence to her. Accordingly I received a line or two from Martha every now and then, and, about November, I had a note to say her mistress was very low and sadly off her food, and the account made me so uneasy that, although Martha did not decidedly summon me, I packed up my things and went. I received a warm welcome, in spite of the little flurry produced by my impromptu visit, for I had only been able to give a day's notice. Miss Matilda looked miserably ill, and I prepared to comfort and cosset her. I went down to have a private talk with Martha. "How long has your mistress been so poorly?" I asked, as I stood by the kitchen fire. "Well, I think it's better than a fortnight." "It is. I know. It was one Tuesday, after Miss Pole had been, that she went into this moping way. I thought she was tired and it would go off with a night's rest. But no, she has gone on ever since, till I thought it my duty to write to you, ma'am." "You did quite right, Martha. It is a comfort to think she has so faithful a servant about her. And I hope you find your place comfortable?" "Well, ma'am, Mrs. is very kind, and there's plenty to eat and drink, and no more work but what I can do easily. But—" Martha hesitated. "But what, Martha?" "Why, it seems so hard of Mrs. not to let me have any followers. There's such lots of young fellows in the town, and many a one has as much as offered to keep company with me, and I may never be in such a likely place again, and it's like wasting an opportunity. Many a girl as I know would have 'em unbeknownst to Mrs. But I've given my word, and I'll stick to it. Or else this is just the house for Mrs. never to be the wiser, if they did come. And it's such a capable kitchen, there's such good dark corners in it, I'd be bound to hide anyone. I counted up last Sunday night, for I'll not deny I was crying, because I had to shut the door in Jem Hearn's face, and he's a steady young man, fit for any girl, only I had given Mrs. my word." Martha was all but crying again, and I had little comfort to give her, for I knew from old experience of the horror with which both the Miss Jenkynses looked upon followers, and in Miss Matty's present nervous state this dread was not likely to be lessened. I went to see Miss Pole the next day, and took her completely by surprise, for she had not been to see Miss Matilda for 2 days. "And now I must go back with you, my dear, for I promised to let her know how Thomas Holbrook went on. And, I'm sorry to say, his housekeeper has sent me word today that he hasn't long to live. Poor Thomas! The journey to Paris was quite too much for him. His housekeeper says he has hardly ever been round his fields since, but just sits with his hands on his knees in the counting-house, not reading or anything, but only saying what a wonderful city Paris was. Paris has much to answer for if it's killed my cousin Thomas, for a better man never lived." "Does Miss Matilda know of his illness?" asked I, a new light as to the cause of her indisposition dawning upon me. "Dear, to be sure, yes. Has not she told you? I let her know a fortnight ago, or more, when first I heard of it. How odd she shouldn't have told you." Not at all, I thought, but I did not say anything. I felt almost guilty of having spied too curiously into that tender heart, and I was not going to speak of its secrets, hidden, Miss Matty believed, from all the world. I ushered Miss Pole into Miss Matilda's little drawing-room, and then left them alone. but I was not surprised when Martha came to my bedroom door to ask me to go down to dinner alone, for that Mrs. had one of her bad headaches. She came into the drawing-room at tea-time, but it was evidently an effort to her, and, as if to make up for some reproachful feeling against her late sister, Miss Jenkyns, which had been troubling her all the afternoon, and for which she now felt penitent, she kept telling me how good and how clever Deborah was in her youth, how she used to settle what gowns they were to wear at all the parties. Faint, ghostly ideas of grim parties far away in the distance when Miss Matty and Miss Pole were young, and how Deborah and her mother had started the Benefit Society for the Poor, and taught girls cooking and plain sewing, and how Deborah had once danced with a lord, and how she used to visit at Sir Peter Arley's, and try to remodel the quiet rectory establishment on the plans of Locksley Hall, where they kept 30 servants, and how she had nursed Miss Matty through a long, long illness of which I had never heard before, but which I now dated in my own mind as following the dismissal of the suit of Mr. Holbrook. So we talked softly and quietly of old times through the long November evening. The next day Miss Pole brought us word that Mr. Holbrook was dead. Miss Matty heard the news in silence. In fact, from the account of the previous day, it was only what we had to expect. Miss Pole kept calling upon us for some expression of regret by asking if it was not sad that he was gone, and saying, to think of that pleasant day last June when he seemed so well, and he might have lived this dozen years if he had not gone to that wicked Paris, where they are always having revolutions. She paused for some demonstration on our part. I saw Miss Matty could not speak. She was trembling so nervously, so I said what I really felt. And after a call of some duration, all the time of which I have no doubt Miss Pole thought Miss Matty received the news very calmly, our visitor took her leave. Miss Matty made a strong effort to conceal her feelings, a concealment she practised even with me, for she has never alluded to Mr. Holbrook again, although the book he gave her lies with her Bible on the little table by her bedside. She did not think I heard her when she asked the little milliner of Cranford to make her caps something like the Honourable Mrs. Jameson's, or that I noticed the reply, "But she wears widow's caps, ma'am." "Oh, I only meant something in that style, not widows, of course, but rather like Mrs. Jameson's." This effort at concealment was the beginning of the tremulous motion of head and hands which I have seen ever since in Miss Matty. The evening of the day on which we heard of Mr. Holbrook's death, Miss Matilda was very silent and thoughtful. After prayers she called Martha back, and then she stood, uncertain what to say. "Martha," she said at last, "you are young." And then she made so long a pause that Martha, to remind her of a half-finished sentence, dropped a curtsy, and said, "Yes, please, ma'am. 22 last 3rd of October, please, ma'am." "And perhaps, Martha, you may some time meet with a young man you like, and who likes you. I did say you were not to have followers, but if you meet with such a young man, and tell me, and I find he is respectable, I have no objection to his coming to see you once a week." "God forbid," said she in a low voice, "that I should grieve any young hearts." She spoke as if she were providing for some distant contingency, and was rather startled when Martha made her ready eager answer. "Please, ma'am, there's Jem Hearn, and he's a joiner making 3 and 6pence a day, and 6'1" in his stockinged feet. Please, ma'am, and if you'll ask about him tomorrow morning, everyone will give him a character for steadiness, and he'll be glad enough to come tomorrow night, I'll be bound." Though Miss Matty was startled, she submitted to fate and love. End of chapter 4.
Okay. So, I loved Mr. Holbrook. I really did. I also love what we get to see of Miss Pole. I loved the line, "My cousin might make a drive, I think," said Miss Pole, who was afraid of earache and had only her cap on. What an extraordinary set of non sequiturs, and just an opportunity for us to see kind of the billiard game that's going on in her brain. With things just kinda careening here and there around in her brain, and some of it comes out her mouth, and some of it's not connected to anything else, and I just love that. I also loved Mr. Holbrook naming his cows after the 26 letters of the alphabet. Elizabeth Gaskell just has a thing for quirky cows, and I am here for that. I love that. I also loved Mary Smith's description of Mr. Holbrook as they walk through the garden. Now, I can't remember. I've listened to so many different versions of Cranford. I can't remember if Noel Badrian did it the way that it's supposed to be done in the book. In the book, it's very clear that he mispronounces Byron, like more like Byron or Biren. It's a shorter I and many, many, many R's, which is just fun. And then Goethe is pronounced phonetically without the umlauts, so it's like Goethe, which I also love. You know, it's the I've read it 1,000 times, but I've never actually heard anybody say it out loud, so making a guess. And if you're lucky, you have people around you who pull you aside and go, "Actually, it's Goethe. I know you know the word. I'm just letting you know how it's pronounced." Those are good people to have around. I don't think Mr. Holbrook has had too many people like that in his life. But I also love I love his joy in his garden, but I really love the description of his sitting room, just books everywhere, and especially that they were books chosen because he loved them, not because they were classical, not because they had this great reputation or everybody says it's really good. It's just he's surrounded by the stuff that he loves and does not care a fig for anybody else. And since I'm doing Pride and Prejudice at the same time, there's an interesting parallel because Bingley mentions that Darcy has a really fabulous library. And then there's a crack made about how Darcy is still buying books for the library, even though it is huge already. And Darcy's response is basically, I would not be a very good steward of Pemberley if I wasn't keeping up with stocking the library. So many marvelous books are being written right now. You know, what kind of an adult would I be responsible for this property, responsible for the next person who's going to own this property? What kind of a jerk would I be not to be working on keeping the library up? And Darcy never talks about buying books because they are socially acceptable, but I think the part of the implication is that he is definitely buying the things that are well reviewed and important, capital I, at the time, whereas Mr. Holbrook is just kind of anything he wants to hug, he gets, and I love that. I also got a kick out of Mary Smith doing her little Caesar impression, about the peas. I saw, I imitated, I survived. Ah, and that was using a rounded knife, so they didn't have the big stabby knives, like you would like a Bowie knife. She had the rounded knife like at a regular place setting like we would have now, and she's using the tip to kind of use it spoonishly as a food delivery device, the same way that Mr. Holbrook was doing. I had no clue that it would have been an honor to be asked to fill a man's pipe with tobacco. I am going to make a guess here and say that that is probably 20 or 30 years out of date, but it's still just one of those little things that we get from Gaskell. Miss Matty, two of her lines that I just loved. "I only hope it is not improper. So many pleasant things are." Why, yes. And also, "Uncouth is too hard a word. I should call him eccentric." Very clever people always are. You can just remember that. If you consider yourself eccentric or other people consider you eccentric, just remember, very clever people always are eccentric. The reason why I made such a big hoo-ha about the ash buds line in the beginning, the fact that the reference to it had been cut, so it's a huge non sequitur in our version, is because I think the point that Mr. Holbrook makes when he talks about the black as an ash bud, or do you know how black an ash bud is? And he's not talking about ashes in the fireplace, ash, the tree, buds. I love that he makes it clear that this was a fact that he never knew. And he is proud of the I never knew it until I learned it from a poet fact. That kind of, I spent all this part of my life not knowing something, but now I know. It's like having somebody say, oh, I've never read The Phantom Tollbooth. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so jealous you get to read it for the first time. You get to have that experience of it being completely new for you. And that's such a lovely place to be. It's kind of that same vibe. And I just love Mr. Holbrook so much. Okay, you caught the joke. Miss Pole encouraged him to read poetry so she could count her stitches in her crochet. Tactics, ladies and gentlemen who crochet, tactics. I also loved Elizabeth Gaskell's line that Mr. Holbrook's actions flutter Miss Matty. They don't fluster her. They flutter her, which, of course, that is the correct word. Thank you, Mrs. Gaskell. I also loved, as horrible a stereotype as it might be, it did make me laugh out loud when she says, oh, I don't think he should go to France. I don't believe frogs will agree with him. And he used to have to be careful about what he ate, which is interesting, right? Because that shows that she knew more about him than she had betrayed before. She has kind of been trying to play it like, oh, well, we weren't really close, but we were close. No. She knew he had to be careful about what he ate or it would upset his stomach. That's spending some time with each other. I also thought it was interesting that last week we learned that Martha may not know how to serve at a table, but she does know how to read and write because she's the one writing back and forth with Mary Smith about Miss Matty. That is interesting, right? Because we know Martha's, quote unquote, a good girl. She's been raised well enough, but she hasn't been raised so well that she could work in a shop. She's working as a house servant. But she's also expected, because these women are older, she is also expected to do things like the shopping, and she's going to have to take money from Miss Matty, the money that Miss Matty gives her to go buy meat and groceries and produce and bread and all of that stuff. She may make the bread herself. Either way, she has to be trusted with that level of responsibility. And you would expect in that situation that somebody who gets that job can at least do math. But math and read and write, to me, seemed significant. But again, it goes back to the same thing as before. The girls' samplers. If they learned embroidery and they made themselves a sampler to demonstrate what they've learned, there's letters and there's almost always words on those samplers. So I think it's very likely that there were more samplers per capita in the United States than there were in England, at least in the 1700s, because of the Puritan Quaker. England shipped all their Puritans over here. So we get all the Puritans, but the Puritans didn't. There are a lot of things about the Puritans that are not my favorite things in the world. But the one thing about the Puritans that I really do like is that, as far as my research has gone, and I could be wrong, the Puritans generally felt that it was important for girls to read and write as well as boys. And you can tell when you look at the samplers that this idea that the girls should at least be able to read and write, and even better read the Bible, because that was the only reason to learn how to read if you were Puritan. It was so you could read the Bible. It mattered. right? I'm beating a dead horse. I think it's interesting. I also loved that Miss Matty, was it Miss Matty or Miss Pole, called in France Wicked Paris, where they are always having revolutions. It's been a minute since the French Revolution, remember? But it's like that's all they do in Paris. Oh, it's another revolution. Shocked. So we now have 2 chapters where love conquers the day. We have Miss Jenkyns saying about Miss Jessie, the man having his arm around Miss Jessie, the most proper place for his arm to be. Not something I had expected to hear from Miss Jenkyns. And then here we have Miss Matty and Martha, which the end of this chapter just made me tear up every time. And Miss Matty, God forbid that I should grieve any young hearts. Good Miss Matty. All right. Don't forget, any comments, questions, ideas, thoughts, call 206-350-1642. Don't forget to send your videos of you doing crafty things. And if you have a group or a shop or anything that you would like to publicize, we will put that text up on the screen. There's a form to fill out, and that's also how you submit your video. That link will be in the show notes. And if you have any tips on container gardening, deck gardening, semi-shade gardening, send those on over, heather@craftlit.com. Don't forget, the Thin Man movie night is at the end of this month, May. And mid to late May, Moby Dick will be starting. Not surprisingly, it's a heavy lift, which is actually good because the opening of the book is actually very funny. So I'm trying to do a lot of the hard research while the text is still very funny. And then I'll be able to bring that to you. Oh, and the last thing, I'm going to have Euan read us out. Euan is going to be reading for us samples of the poems in honor of Mr. Holbrook. So Euan will read us out, and then I'll catch you next week. All right, here we go with the poems. Have fun. Bye.
Rise, heart, thy Lord is risen. Sing his praise without delays. Who takes thee by the hand, that thou likewise with him mayst rise. Rise, heart, thy Lord is risen. Sing his praise without delays. Who takes thee by the hand, that thou likewise with him mayst rise. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. Grief melts away, like snow in May, as if there were no such cold thing. Who would have thought my shriveled heart could have recovered greenness? It was gone quite underground, as flowers depart to see their mother root when they have blown. Thy garden is not bare, and I shall find once more the sweet communion with thy saints. When God at first made man, having a glass of blessings standing by.
You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at craftlit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/craftlit to craftlit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at craftlit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.